We continue now at the top of Daf Nun Aleph and Meseches Zevachim. This is Zevachim Daf 50a. On the previous summit, the Gemara said that Dover Halamed Mehekish, something that is learned from a Hekish, from a comparison, Chozer Malamed B'Kal V'Chomer, is able to teach through a Kal V'Chomer. And the Gemara now continues and says, that is true, Midetana Devei Rabbi Yishmael. That is true from the Tana Devei Rabbi Yishmael, what was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Yishmael. And Rashi explains, Midetana Devei Rabbi Yishmael B'Perek Beis Shammai. This was in Perek Beis Shammai earlier. It was quoted, Uma b'Mokam Shalohushvu Karban l'Karban. That's what the Gemara said earlier. V'Ukimna Hasam, and the Gemara over there establishes in that sugya, because Sava Rabbi Yishmael, that Rabbi Yishmael holds, Davar Halamed Behekish Chozer Malamed B'Kal V'Chomer. That something that's learned from a Hekish is able to teach through a Kal V'Chomer. And the Gemara continues and asks, Davar Halamed Behekish, something that is learned from a Hekish, Mao Sheyilamed B'Vinyanav, is it able to teach through a Binyanav? Rashi explains B'Binyanav is a Mamotzinu. That's a Mamotzinu. A Mamotzinu, as we say, is when we say, just like we find over here, we should apply the same idea over here in another context. V'Kulon She'elos Halalu, and Rashi says, all of these questions, B'Kodshim, that are asked with regards to Kodshim, Nishalu, they were asked, V'Arba She'elos B'Chol Mida Umida. You actually have 4 questions with each kind of derivation. Kagon, for example, Davar Halamed Behekish, let's say you have something that's learned from a Hekish, Ma'u She'elamed Behekish, Uv'Gzera Shavu, V'Kal V'Chomer, B'Binyanav. Is that able to teach through, again, these 4 ideas, Hekish, Gzera Shavu, Kal V'Chomer, and Binyanav? And then the same question, V'Davar Halamed B'Gzera Shavu, let's say something is learned from a Gzera Shavu, Ma'u She'yilmed Behekish, Uv'Gzera Shavu, again, the same question, can that teach through a Hekish, a Gzera Shava, Kal V'Chomer, Binyanav? V'Domer Halamed B'Binyanav, Ma'o She'elamed B'Kulan, and something that's learned from Binyanav, can it teach through all of them? These are the questions of the Gemara. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah says, Lo lichtov tzefona ba'asham. It would not be necessary to write the requirement of north by a karban asham, that it has to be slaughtered in the north of the Azara by the karban asham. V'teisi mi binyanav, and you should have been able to learn it from a binyanav, meaning if something learned from a hekesh could teach through a binyanav, then that would have been effective. Mechatas, you could have learned from chatas. Chatas is derived from a hekesh, and then learn a binyanav, a mamotzinu, just like we find by chatas, so too by asham. And so lamai hilchas okasve. So what's the reason why Tzefona is written by Asham, Lav Lamemer, is it not to say that Davar Halamed Behekish, that something learned from a Hekish, Ein Chozer, Umelamed Bebinyanav, is not able to teach through a Binyanav. But the Gemara continues and asks, Vilataimich, but according to your reasoning, if we can use a Binyanav, Teisi mi Binyanav me Ola, why can't we just learn it from a Binyanav from Ola? And Ola is the original source. Ola is not derived from a Hekish. If a Binyanav would be effective, you could have learned that from Ola. My time Aloasin, what's the reason why you can't learn from a Binyanav from Ola? Misham de Ikala Mifrach, because by a Binyanav, by a Mamotzinu, you can refute it if you find something unique by that particular halacha. And we could say Mala Ola, Shekain Kala, we'll say that Ola is unique because it's entirely burned on the Mizbech, and that's why the Binyanav doesn't work. So Chatas Nami Ikala Mifrach, when it comes to Karban Chatas as well, you also have a refutation, because Mala Chatas, Shekain Mechaperes, Al Chayve Krisos, because Chatas is also unique, because it's able to atone for liabilities of Kares. And the Gemara says, well, Chada Mechada Lo Asi, we understand you can't learn one directly from one, because each carbon is unique. But Teisi Chada Metarti, why can't you learn one carbon, derive it from the combination, the common denominator of 2 of them? And the Gemara says, Mehei Teisi, well, which ones are you going to derive? Lo Nichtov Rachmana Ola, for example, let's say the Torah does not write it by Ola. V'Teisi Mechatas V'Asham, we'll try to derive Ola from Chatas and Asham. But Malahanach, Shekain Mechaperin, but those are unique because they are a kapara, they're an atonement. And let's say you suggest, Lo Nichtov Rachmana B'Chatas, let the Torah not write the requirement of north by Chatas. V'Teisi Mehanach, and let it be learned from the other karbanas, from Asham and from Ola. Malahanach Shekain Zecharim, those are also unique because they have to be animals that are male. And Lo Nichtov B'Asham, and maybe you'll suggest, let's not write it by Asham. V'Teisi Mehanach, and learn it again from Ola and Chatas. Malahanach Shekain Yeshnan B'Tzibur K'V'Yachid, those are unique because they exist by the community just like they exist by the individual, and so therefore you can't learn it from the Mamotzinu, and that's why it's not necessarily a proof as an answer to our question. And the Gemara continues and asks, Davar Halamed B'Gzera Shava, something that is derived from a Gzera Shava, Ma'u Sheyilamed B'Hekish, is it able to teach through a Hekish? And the Gemara says, Amar Rapapa says, V'zos Torahs Zevach HaShlamim, the Pasuk says, this is the law of Shlamim, and then the Pasuk goes on to say, Imal Toda, that talks about a carbon Toda, and that's a Hekish, a comparison between Shlamim and Toda. Lamadnu L'Toda Sheba Min HaMaiser, that teaches us that a carbon Toda can be brought from the money of Maiser Sheni, Mida Eshkechon Shlamim Da'as Yasumi Meiser, from the fact that we find that a carbon shlamim is able to be brought from the money of Meiser Sheni, and now there's a comparison between shlamim and toda, so that applies to toda as well. And the Gemara continues, shlamim gufayu. Now when it comes to shlamim itself, minolan, from where do we know that shlamim can be brought from the money of Meiser Sheni? Dichsiv sham sham, that's a gezerah shava of sham sham, and so you see that something learned from a gezerah shava can teach through a hekesh. But the Gemara continues and asks, Amar le Mar Zutra b'reider Rav Mori l'Ravina. Mar Zutra, the son of Rav Mori, said to Ravina, Meiser dagan chulin bi'almu. When you're talking about Meiser Sheni, when you're talking about the Meiser of grain, that is chulin, that is not kachim. The entire question over here of whether one derivation can teach another derivation is only a question by kachim. But over here, we're talking about a halacha that's relevant. The Gzerah Shav itself is learned from Meiser Sheni, and therefore it's chulin, so therefore that should not really answer our question. And the Gemara continues, Amar le said to him, Amar amro lamid kodesh u'melamed kodesh. Was the question stated only in a situation where both what is derived and what is doing the teaching is kodesh? Over here it still involves kodesh because it involves shlamim, even though shlamim is being derived from Meiser Sheni, which is doing the teaching, but still that involves kachim. The thing that is derived is kachim, and it's derived through a gzerah shava, and it then goes ahead and teaches through a hekesh, so it still answers our question. And Rashi explains, Lamadnu latoda, from the fact that we have a hekesh between shlamim and toda, because again, toda is described in the pasuk right after shlamim. Mikan behekesh mi shlamim. From here we have a comparison to shlamim, and we learn from shlamim sheba min ha-meiser, that it can be brought from the money of Meiser Sheni. In Perish b'shas nidrof, he explained at the time of his neder, at the time that he made the oath to bring the carbon, al menas lahaviyah mimos Meiser Sheni, that he's going to bring it from money of Meiser Sheni. And then the Gemara said there was a gzerah shava sham sham. There's a gzerah shava that teaches this halacha by shlamim, that it can be brought from Meiser Sheni. B'shlamim ksiv zavachta shlamim v'yachalta sham. By shlamim it uses the word sham. Uv'meiser ksiv v'yachalta lefnei Hashem elokecha b'makom asher yivchar l'shaken shemo sham. It uses the same word sham by Meiser Sheni. Meiser degoncha tiroshcha v'yitzarecho v'choros. And so therefore again you have a gzerah shava and then you have a hekesh. And Rashi continues, chulin hu b'Meiser Sheni is chulin. V'anon b'kachim kami boilan. And isn't our whole question by kachim? And then the Gemara said, Amar amar ha'amar lamid kodesh u'melamed kodesh bitmi. Are we only talking where what is derived is kodesh and what's doing the teaching is kodesh? V'chishneyen tzrichen shiyu b'kachim. Do they both have to be kachim? Hoel v'lamad kodesh, as long as what's derived is kodesh. Kigon shlamim, for example, in our case the shlamim shapir mifshad bayan. We're still answering our question. Devosar lamed azlina, because we follow the thing that's derived. Umar Zutra savar. Now Mar Zutra, he held that basar melamed azlina, that we follow what's doing the teaching, and that's why he asked this question. V'hainu damrin bi'alman. That's why we say in general, hanichol leman damar basar lamed azlina. And this works according to the one who says that we follow what is derived, because again it is a machlokus whether we follow the lamad or whether we follow the melamed. And the Gemara continues and asks, Davar halamid b'gzerah shava, something that is learned from a gzerah shava, mahu sheyelamid b'gzerah shava, is it able to teach through a gzerah shava? And the Gemara continues and answers, Amar Rami Bar Chama. Rami Bar Chama says, Tanya, we learned in a brisa, soles morbeches, the pasuk says soles morbeches, that's referring to the loaves that accompany, it's the poached loaves that accompany the carbon toda. They're made from soles, they're made from fine flour. Lamadnu l'revucha sheba soles, so we learn from here that the revucha, again, these poached loaves, that they are made from fine flour. And the Gemara in the brisa continues and asks, chalos minayin, what about the chalos, the loaves that accompany the carbon toda, what about the chalos? Are they also from soles? Talmud lomar chalos chalos, the pasuk says chalos chalos, that's a gzerah shava. And rekikin minayin, from where do we know the wafers, that they come from fine flour? Talmud lomar matzos matzos, the pasuk says matzos matzos, that's another gzerah shava, and so therefore you have a gzerah shava from a gzerah shava. It seems like davar halamid b'gzerah shava is able to teach through a gzerah shava. But the Gemara says, Amar le Ravina, Ravina said to him, Mimai de matzos matzos mechalos gomer. How do you know that this gzerah shava of matzos matzos is deriving from chalos, where it says matzos? Dilma mimafe tanur gomer. Maybe it's being learned from somewhere else, from mafe tanur, that's something that is baked in the oven, the carbon mincha that's baked in the oven. Maybe that's where we're deriving fine flour from. And so the Gemara says, Ela mar Rava, rather Rava says, the answer comes from the following brisa. Tanya, we learned in a brisa, the pasuk says, by the power of the Kohen Gadol, v'kirbo ufirsho v'hotzi, it says the innards and the dung, they are taken out. It's talking about when you take them out of the machane, outside of Yerushalayim, in order to burn them. And the brisa says, Melamed, this teaches shamotzio shalom, that you bring it out whole. Now, Yochol Yisrafenu Shalom, one might think that you burn it whole as well. Nemar Kan Rosho Ukarav, it says over here, Rosho Ukarav, meaning its head and its legs. V'nemar Lahalan, and it says further on, it uses the same expression. This is by Carbon Ola. It says Rosho Firsho Ukrav, it says its head and its legs. Malahalan al Yedei Nituach, just like over there, you cut it up into pieces. Afkan al Yedei Nituach, so too over here, you cut it up into pieces, and that is the first Gezerah Shaveh. And the Gemara continues, Im alahalon behefshit. Now, if over there, it's through hefshit, which is by the carbonola, they flayed the carbonola, they separated the skin. Afkan nami behefshit, so too over here, maybe you have to flay it. Talmud lomar v'kirbo firsho. The pasuk says v'kirbo firsho. The Gemara says, my Talmud, what is the derivation over here? How does v'kirbo firsho teach anything about flaying it? Amar Papa says, kishem shapirsho b'kirbo. It means as follows: just like the dung is inside the animal, kach besaro ba'oro, so too the flesh of the animal is inside the hide, and you're not supposed to do hefshit. You're not supposed to flay the animal. And the Gemara continues, v'tanyan, we learned in a brisa. Rebbe says, nemar kan oru baso uferish. It says over here the hide and the meat and the dung, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Nun Amid Beis.